Welcome back to the Game of Muscle Sim Racing Society. Unfortunately, though Assetto Corsa has more cars in it than your average supermarket car park, where it's somewhat lacking is in its racetrack department. Fortunately though, there's some modders out there with too much time, too much talent and too much generosity, and they produce some absolutely insane racetracks. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you my top 6 racetracks that you can download for Assetto Corsa. Do keep in mind though that there's more than 6 fantastic tracks for AC, and if you have one that you particularly like, drop it in the comment section so those people watching the video can go and download those as well. On to our first pick. Poverty Zandvoort, otherwise known as Bridgehampton Race Circuit. Now this track is absolutely fantastic because it's basically a joyride through some sand dunes that have hedges growing on them. And because the real world circuit was originally built in 1957, safety wasn't exactly paramount, as you can tell by the half tyres sticking out of the corners, the complete lack of runoff, and it's of course from that time period where instead of Armco barriers, you had trees to stop vehicles hitting into spectators. I think what's really cool with this circuit is that the real world track was retired in 1997, probably due to them running out of places to store the bodies. But thanks to the miracle of driving simulators and virtual reality, you can just go there and experience something that no longer exists, and experience it in exquisite detail because of the work that Lilski has put into the track model. You've got really nice texture work going on here, and you can just see the subtleties of how the track merges into the surrounding environment, how the sand is sort of encroaching on the edge of the track texture that really ties it in and makes it feel like a real bit of tarmac. It's not one of those circuits where the tarmac is this pristine path going through some pristine countryside. It is a complete mess. Also, what's really nice is you've got these little smoothed over potholes and bumps where at times you're probably thinking to yourself, I'd rather be driving a Land Rover than a race car over this. But when you feel it through your force feedback, it really just draws you into the game and again makes you feel like you're on a real bit of tarmac that's had vehicles and the occasional driver's face pummel the road surface. Of particular note as well is just how well the grass has been placed around the track along with the bushes and hedges. It's not the case that it's just haphazardly spotted around, it's actually placed in a really nice way, again taking into consideration of how the banks would be affected by wind and where the grass would be worn out from drivers running off, and just little gaps and variations in the grass that make each corner and each part of the circuit look very distinct and unique, despite the circuit in general being reasonably samey in nature. The end result is it's a lot easier to work out where breakpoints are, it's a lot easier to remember the different types of corners on the circuit, and you get an absolutely fantastic sense of speed as everything whizzes past your face. An awesome track model, a little bit tricky to drive. Make sure you've booked your life insurance before you take your vehicle out here, but one of my favourites nonetheless. The Paul Ricard mod track is absolutely stunning. So much so that I'd go out on a limb and say this looks better than some of the tracks included with Assetto Corsa. You really wouldn't notice if this was included in the game and you wouldn't think of it as a mod track. Now you know a track modeler is borderline insane when not only do they include all the buildings that you'd associate with a track and side vehicles and little nice details, but they've also gone and modelled the airport that's next to the track along with some aeroplanes. Totally normal to do that in your spare time. You'll notice coming around this corner the hills in the distance as well look absolutely superb, and again just tie you into the feeling that you're in a real world location with a surrounding environment. And that's especially one of the things you notice with simulators like iRacing, for example, where they bother to model all those external details and they might not seem core to the driving experience. I mean, sure, you're not driving on those mountain sides, but in terms of actually fooling your brain to thinking that you're really at a real-world location, I think these things are really important. In some ways, I think it's rather unfortunate that Paul Ricard as a track is a little bit dull, I have to say, but Starrett 3D has done a really good job of capturing the subtleties that do exist in the road surface at this circuit, in that it's not completely flat. There are some subtle slopes and cambers to the corners which really do make or break a lot of the corners on this track, and crucially you really notice the attention to detail in the texture work and the subtleties of how the circuit blends in with the side of the track, the way the dirt has built up on the curbing, the way things aren't pristine. And I think that's a really crucial thing with racetracks, especially modern racetracks and well-maintained racetracks such as Paul Ricard is in reality. They're not gone over with a toothbrush and bleach with 1,000 people every single lap making sure it's totally spotless. You know, these circuits do have a build-up of dirt on them. The reality isn't completely clean, and you notice with these high-quality racetracks that the modders that have put them together have a very good eye for how wear builds up, where dirt builds up, and how to actually execute that technically. I also think of the versions of Paul Ricard, this was the first one where I didn't just feel completely lost. When it comes to playing Paul Ricard in driving simulators, it tends to feel like you're being bamboozled by some alien zebra that's been smeared all over the sides of the road circuit. But on this version it really doesn't feel too bad, and I think because of the additional track details and the fantastic texture work, it really negates that effect of every corner appearing to be the same, or not knowing which corner's coming after the one you've just done when you're first learning the track. Though in terms of layout, especially with slower vehicles, it's not one of my favourite circuits to drive, this is one of the best, if not the best looking mod track for Assetto Corsa at this point in time. Donington Park. It's said to be the heart of British motorsport, which is probably why they constantly argue what to do with it, modify things, but then go back on it, and then the paperwork gets lost and nobody knows what's happening. Though the real-world track seems to be in a constant state of confusion, fortunately the mod track isn't, and it's absolutely superb. Now I have a bit of a soft spot for this circuit, partly because it used to be where I lived, and secondly because it was just one of those tracks that really stood out in the original Toka games. But that's the past, and this is now the future, and Brun has completely nailed the circuit. Again, as you may have noticed, is a theme of these tracks that I really like. The overall environment is executed really well in this. Just things like the actual pit boxes, the side buildings, the toilet booths, the little hillsides where spectators stand, and the complete lack of spectators because it's not a motorbike race. Rather nicely, you also have the occasional air traffic from East Midlands Airport, and sometimes some fighter jets fly over, burning copious amounts of taxpayers' money in fuel. But it all goes together to make the environment and game world on this circuit again just feel super immersive, especially in VR. That's of course the icing on the cake, and really where it comes together mostly are in the track details and the road surface. But also when it comes to the actual slopes and the cambers of this track, they've got the hillside done especially well. I noticed recently watching videos of Gran Turismo, no, it was GTR 2, that the Donington track version in that is quite a bit different to the reality. Whereas this version, and I think iRacing's version of Donington are pretty much spot on with the real world track and do just capture the essence of the real world circuit. I might sound like some obsessed gardener, but it has to be pointed out as well that the grass, again, is done really well on this track. And it's not just a case that they've just, you know, put grass higgledy-piggledy. It's little bits of different coloured grass, little patches of slightly better watered grass, slightly lighter, and it's a small thing, but to me it adds a lot to the believability of the circuit. And again, if you've got a faster computer that allows you to put the track on maximum detail so you can see the grass, gives you a better sense of speed. And I think what grass and high frequency objects on a track does is it causes there to be a degree of noise visually that your brain's still processing, that then takes up your sort of mental power, making it much harder to notice things like lighting that might not be so good, or shadows in certain places might not be so good, or various textures in the distance and objects that might be misplaced or slightly misshapen. Not that they are on this version of Donington, I have to say. Everything just looks spot on. But I definitely think there's something to having a nice bit of grass on a circuit. I won't talk about it anymore. All said and done, this version of Donington Park is exquisite. one of my favourite tracks for AC, and if you don't have it in your Assetto Corsa install folder, you should be sent to North Korea and executed immediately. So make sure you got it in your game, and I won't tell Kim Jong-un that you've disappointed the People's Republic. Cowboys rode America on horseback, but now you can do it in a sports car in Assetto Corsa. Now this is a track that I only know from iRacing, and it's actually a track I really like. It's got some really interesting, long drawn out corners that I don't think are anywhere else to be found. So it's just really nice to have this circuit in AC. But of course this track wasn't actually an original Assetto Corsa mod track. It first found itself being created by Slim Jim for R-Factor, and then Mr. Albert McSaltons came along, saved the day, and did a conversion to AC, doing the required work to make it work with that simulator. And I think this is one of the really nice things with mod tracks. As long as people get permission from the various other people that have worked on the project, it's just really nice to see circuits end up in multiple simulators, so you've got more options with the various cars that might happen to be better in one sim or another sim, or just people that happen to prefer one sim over another sim can drive that circuit that they want. It's just better for everyone when people share and hug trees and, you know, get on really. Now you do notice with this track a little bit it's R-Factor 1 heritage, in that I think the textures of the road surface at times are a little bit bland and maybe could be a bit more exciting. But with that said, it's still way and above your average mod track. The side details, as I say, are really fantastic. There's some really nice, just going on about shrubberies and bushes and trees constantly. I'm sorry, don't know what's happened to me, need more tea. But there's some trees on this circuit that overhang the track. And when you're playing in VR, they just feel like they're just missing the top of your head. It's like when you're travelling on a double-decker bus through the English countryside, murdering all the birds that have peacefully nested by the side of the road. Really, if I'm honest though, the main reason I like this track is it's really like a Buddhist monk training tool. You'll load it up to do a couple of hot laps. Before you know it, you've spent 40 minutes meandering through the American countryside. Maybe there's some students smoking cannabis off to the side and that's affecting me, or maybe it's the advertising sausages and it's making me want an English breakfast, and it reminds me each lap, which then reinvigorates my spirit. I don't know what it is, but I really like this track. I really like the work that Slim Jim originally did on the R-Factor version, and I think Albert McSaltons has done a really good job of making sure those little bits and bobs are in place for it to actually look really nice in Assetto Corsa and work really well in Assetto Corsa with the various grip tweaks and graphical tweaks and everything else that has to be done to get it in another simulator. So for a life of tranquility, calm and peace, make sure you download Road America and get it in your sim right away. Back into the driving simulator time machine, and we find ourselves at Longford 1967, which was originally made by Woo-Choo for R-Factor 2 and was converted by Tiago Lima for Assetto Corsa. And this track is absolutely phenomenal. Should you play this in virtual reality, you genuinely do feel as if you've gone back in time, and you need to watch out for Doris crossing the road with a little picnic hamper. There's just so many details on this circuit, it's hard to really talk about all of them. Of course, really good bushes and grass, the most important part of all tracks, I'm sure you all can all gather. But things like the power cables, the buildings around the circuit, their construction, the little road markings, the brake markers, the road textures, even the spectators are actually custom made for this circuit and they're all wearing the correct clothing. The little farm buildings, there's just so much going on. It really pulls you into the environment. And how many racetracks have a train crossing on them? Unfortunately, there's no trains going through that you have to avoid. That could have just spiced things up a little bit more. On top of the fact that cars were constructed from magnesium and essentially turned you into the wick of a candle should you burst into flames. But ultimately, what I would say is if you like driving vintage cars, as was the case with R-Factor 2, this is the perfect track to take the Shelby Cobra, the old Maserati, the old Lotuses, and just experience the joy of high-speed countryside driving. It's really nice to see that contrast between the historical racing, where it was basically tarmacked rally driving on a closed circuit, compared to modern tracks where even if they're a city track, you know, there's really pristine Armco and everything's all polished out and designed for the race cars to go over it in a very specific way. What I'm saying is if F1 wants to be more exciting and capture a younger audience, they need more train crossings on the circuit. Monza T1, add a train crossing in there and you've got a spectacle. Get your goggles on, your leather hat, and try out some of those vintage cars that maybe you've put off and they didn't make too much sense on the modern circuits, and download Longford. It's absolutely amazing, a track you can put hours into, and maybe once you've finished doing your driving you can just park up and admire the fantastically modelled countryside that seemingly goes off miles into the distance. It's almost as if this was built for a flight simulator as well as a driving sim. I promise Aussie Stig's not holding me hostage, but we're back in the land down under and we are at Barbagallo Raceway. I'm not quite sure how they say it. You know, they don't quite speak English properly, the Australians, bless them. They try. But Dazzy B2K3 has done an incredible job, and again it really comes down to just the attention to detail. The pit boxes, the surrounding circuit, again it feels a bit like a flight simulator scenery, that the distance that everything's being fleshed out to. But then once you get down to the macro level and you look at the road surface, the curbing, all those little details that are the really important details when it comes to the end drive, everything's just executed to a really, really high standard. You guys might not know this, but of course it's used for the V8 supercar racing in Australia. And originally the circuit was actually going to be an oval, but of course kangaroos kept running on the circuit whilst they were laying down the tarmac, and that caused them to put all these nooks and crannies and turns in, and coincidentally that produced a really exciting nippy circuit. And though it's small and it doesn't particularly have that many corners, and as I say most of them are right hand turns, it's just a really exciting track to just keep pounding your vehicle around and trying not to go over the track limits, because you will find if you do go on the grass, a lot of the corners have the tendency to just suck you off the road, either into the barriers at the side or down a hillside, where you'll be eaten by ravenous kangaroos and bitten by poisonous spiders. So you know, there's always that intensity and pressure to keep the vehicle on the track, which I think is where the excitement comes from. It's definitely one of those circuits I think is easy to get to grips with initially, but nail-bitingly difficult to actually get the most out of it, and very easy to just end up losing your race in a split second. I've had to put this track last and dock at least 10 points because there is no grass at the side of the circuit. Trees, granted, I'll give some points for that, but no grass, so sort it out, Mr. Dazzy B2K3, and you've got a top track. But I really love this circuit, highly recommend downloading it, you'll have a blast on it if you do. Absolutely fantastic work by all the modders that have done all these tracks, and I really appreciate all the effort you put into these things, guys, and the fact that you put it out there for free. You're totally insane. So hopefully there's been some tracks there that you've never seen before and now we're going to get. I hope this video was also enjoyable to watch and supremely exciting. Don't forget to click on the subscribe button, like or dislike, and let us know in the comments what tracks you happen to like the most and which tracks we should feature in our next video, where we'll basically list all the tracks that everyone needs rather than just my top 6 pick. Until the next one, thanks for watching everybody, goodbye.